Hello everyone. Today I'm going to demonstrate how AWS Fraud Control Takeover Protection supports inspection of origin response. AWS WAF is a web application firewall that helps protect web applications from attacks by allowing you to configure rules that allow, block, or monitor web requests based on conditions that you define. AWS WAF is a multi-layered security service that can protect against a wide range of security threats. It is a fully managed service, which means the resources needed for your enabled controls will be provisioned automatically. You can use AWS managed rules covering common threats or configure your own customized rules. It is highly flexible rule engine that can inspect incoming requests with single-digit millisecond latency. AWS WAF is tightly integrated with all these AWS services AWS customers commonly use to deliver content for their websites and applications. When you use AWS WAF on Amazon CloudFront, your rules run in all AWS Edge locations located around the world close to your end users. This account takeover protection for inspection of origin responses is currently available only for CloudFront distributions. Account takeover is an online illegal activity in which an attacker gains unauthorized access to a person's account. The attacker might do this in a number of ways, such as using stolen credentials or guessing the victim's password through a series of attempts. You can monitor and control account takeover attempts by implementing the AWS WAF Fraud Control Account Takeover Prevention. This managed rule inspects login requests against an updated database of leaked credentials from previous breaches and also looks for abnormally high rates of login requests, indicating a brute force login attempt. AWS WAF offers this feature in the AWS Managed Rules rule group, AWS Managed Rules ATP rule set, and companion application integrations SDKs. ATP managed rules can now also inspect application response data and block login attempts based on customer-defined login failure conditions. This capability helps to protect against brute force attacks involving non-compromised credentials. For login path, you will provide the path of the login endpoint for your application. You also have to specify how your application accepts login attempts by providing the request payload type and the names of the fields within the request body where the username and password are provided. Your specification of the field names depends on the payload type. Please note, this is a paid AWS managed rules and there is a monthly subscription charge of $10 per month and based on the request. Let's see how you can create Web SEL with this feature. Let's move on to AWS Console and let's select WAF and Shield service. We can see Web SEL tab on the left. Let's create one Web SEL for account takeover prevention. Please make sure the region is global, since this feature is only available for CloudFront distributions and CloudFront is a global service. Let's click on Create Web SEL. We will pick a name, AWS WAF ATP. Let's make sure the resource type is Amazon CloudFront distributions. Under Web Request Body Inspection, we will leave it as a default. Then under Associated AWS Resources, this is where we can click on Add AWS Resources and we can add our CloudFront distribution. Then click Next. This is where we will add ATP rules. Let's click on Add Rules. Since this is a managed rules from AWS, let's select Add Managed Rule Groups. This is where we can see all managed rule groups. I will click on AWS Managed Rule Groups. Here we can see account takeover prevention is disabled. We will turn on Add to Web ACL, and this is where we have to edit the required configuration. Let's click on Edit. Here we can configure ATP. As we can see on the top of the description of Account Takeover Prevention and what it does. For the scope of inspection, I will just select Inspect All Web Requests. If you don't want all requests to be inspected, you can always choose the scope down statement where you can select the statement to match your specific criteria. Scrolling down, this is where we will configure the login group. Let's enter the path of your login group. I will just for an example, I'll just put /path/login. You can then select the payload type. I will select JSON for this demo, and we will enter the names of the fields within the request body where the username and password are provided. You can specify success or failure conditions based on HTTP status codes, HTTP headers, or the body of the responses, as well as JSON strings. I will use status code for component type and will include ATP to inspect responses that include the HTTP response code 200 for success condition and 401 for failure condition. Scrolling further down, here is all the account takeover prevention rules, and we can see the two failed login response as volumetric failed login response high and volumetric session failed login response high. So, volumetric failed login response high inspects for IP addresses that have recently been the source of too high a rate of failed login attempts. A high volume is more than 10 failed logins requests from an IP address in a 10-minute window. This rule applies the rule action and labeling to new web requests from an IP address based on the success and failure responses from the protected resource to recent login attempts from the same IP address. You define how to count successes and failures when you configure the rule group. Similarly, volumetric session failed login response high inspects for client sessions that have recently been the source of too high a rate of failed login attempts. Our high volume is more than 10 failed login requests from a client session in a 30-minute window. This rule applies the rule action and labeling to new web requests from a client session based on the success and failure responses from the protected resource to recent login attempts from the same client session. You define how to count successes and failures when you configure the rule group. As you can see, the rule group rule action is block, but you can override to other options to allow, count, captcha, or challenge. Again, please remember AWS WAF only evaluates this rule in web ACLs that protect Amazon CloudFront distributions. Then let's click on Save Rules. Let's click on Add Rules. Here we can see the AWS Managed Rules rule group, AWS Managed Rules ATP rule set. Let's click Next. This is where you can set rule priority if you have multiple rules. Next, by default, Enable Sample Request is enabled, so you can see your sample request from your WAF ACL dashboard. You do have options to disable or just enable sample request for just certain rules. For this demo, I will leave it as default as enable sample request. This will take us to the review page where we can confirm everything is correct and click on Create Web ACL. And here we can see our Web ACL AWS WAF ATP has been created. And that's it. Today we learned how you can set up ATP managed rules to inspect application response data and block login attempts based on customer defined login failure conditions. To learn more about WAF fraud control, account takeover protection, please visit Amazon WAF documentation link provided here. Thank you.